The international community continues to react to the U.S. attacks on Venezuela and the kidnapping of its president, Nicolas Maduro, by the U.S., the latest country to do so being Cuba. And I want to read you the statement coming from the Cuban government saying that Cuba's strong condemnation of the cowardly U.S. aggression against Venezuela and its absolute support for that sister nation. They say the revolutionary government strongly condemns, in the strongest possible terms, the military aggression carried out by the United States against Venezuela, while categorically reaffirming Cuba's absolute support and solidarity with the sister Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and its government. Cuba supports the address delivered by the Executive Vice President, Comrade Delcy Rodriguez, and endorses her demand that the government of the United States provide proof of life of the constitutional President Nicolas Maduro Moros and Comrade Cecilia Flores, as well as its support for the determination of the Bolivarian and Chavista governments and its people to reject the aggression and defend their independence and sovereignty. This cowardly U.S. aggression constitutes a criminal act and a violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. It represents a dangerous escalation of the sustained campaign of war waged for years by the United States against that sister nation, which intensified beginning in September 2025 with the aggressive naval deployment in the Caribbean Sea under false pretext and unfounded accusations lacking any evidence. The statement does go further, but I want to unpack this with my panel once again, Professor Patrick Bond, as well as Advocate Ogada. Prof. Bond, I want that last sentence stands out for me. False pretext and unfounded accusations lacking evidence. The pretext that Donald Trump relied on to invade ultimately today Venezuela seem to have shifted over time. And I want to read from the indictment that came out of the United States District Court's Southern District of New York. And it reads as follows: Nicolas Maduro, the defendant, is at the forefront of that corruption and has partnered with his co-conspirators to use his illegally obtained authority and the institutions he corroded to transport thousands of tons of cocaine to the United States. Since his early days in the Venezuelan government, Maduro Moros has tarnished every public office he has held. I want to pause there. A number of things there. He's allegedly transporting, running a narco state and facilitating the transportation and distribution of cocaine in the U.S. That's one. And then two, that he is presiding over an illegitimate government, that he had rigged elections. How much truth is there to any of that?
What a good question. Oliver, thanks for having me back, and hi to the listeners, the viewers. Look, the main thing is you can't trust the U.S. They claimed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and they arranged an invasion in 2003 and went looking for them. They never found them and never really came to grips, although Anthony Blinken did kind of concede when he was warmongering and promoting NATO's expansion that they may have got that wrong. And I think we'll look back at this, that the Southern District actually began exactly that indictment in March 2000. So this is now nearly 6 years in which we've heard the allegation, but we've seen no proof. So we just saw a few dozen ships or small speedboats being bombed and 115 deaths. No proof. We do know, and DEA statements confirm, that the fentanyl and cocaine isn't coming from Venezuela. It's the cocaine mostly from Colombia, fentanyl from China. Trump says they're killing 300,000 Americans a year, and that's the justification for sort of self-defense and therefore not needing to go to Congress. But I think when all's said and done, given that there's been no evidence and Maduro just hasn't had any history of doing this drug trafficking that we've heard of, and then the big question is Maduro's 2024 electoral victory genuine? And if it's not, and I would say it probably wasn't, he hasn't released the votes properly, then do you therefore just kidnap him? Obviously not. And even if you disagree with Maduro, I think that's the position that most people around the world. Is Maduro a dictator? I think so, yeah. I think he took this Chavista tradition, which is the genuine left popular tradition, maybe you could say benign dictatorship for for Chavez, but certainly I witnessed him there, met him, and found that this was a very popular effort. I think Maduro lost a lot of that popularity over time, and partly he then imposed neoliberal, that is, more pro-corporate policies over the period. So there became a left opposition to Maduro. But certainly all of the leftists that I've known and I've tapped into their statements are against this U.S. invasion. I think that's a crucial thing.
Yeah.
Sovereignty is absolutely critical here, and that no matter whether Maduro was someone who played all sorts of games with his own society and stole that election, the crucial thing is that Donald Trump actually is really doing this for the oil. I think that point can never be underestimated. That was the same for Iraq in 2003. It's always the question, what does the U.S. Military-industrial complex and now Trump's very good friends in the oil companies, what do they get out of it?
Yeah. Advocate Ogada, I want to bring you back into the conversation, and I want to focus perhaps on the fact that this indictment is in a district court in New York in the U.S. A foreign leader is being tried for supposed domestic crimes in a foreign court. It seems to be a bit unusual. Does the U.S. Constitution and legal system enable this sort of thing?
Well, this is something that is amazing as out here as students of international law. Under international law, there is a reach as to which domestic law, domestic systems, domestic jurisdiction can reach. And certainly, you do not indict a sitting head of state, because this sitting head of state is granted immunity under international law. So when you see Donald Joseph Trump parade the images of President Maduro in handcuffs and broadcast it all over the social media, it just shows you the disdain, the arrogance, and the ignorance that informs some of these decisions. Now, let's take what the Americans have been saying. They are saying that Maduro, the narrative we've been given, that Maduro is head of some narco enterprise. What happened on 28th November last year when President Trump decided to pardon former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was also indicted and sentenced in the United States as a former head of state? So you can see the doublespeak from the Americans. And what happened with Maduro today eerily reminds us what happened in 1989 with the Panamanian president, Juan Manuel Noriega. And these are violations of international law. America gets away with it in terms of power, and I'll not be surprised if their domestic courts reinforce what we have always condemned, American exceptionalism. America will cherry pick what aspects of international law works for it, but it will seek to disregard what it sees as an encumbrance, what ties its hands. It does not like the rules that keep it prime and proper, but it will choose to disregard those, and it will do whatever it wants. That is not good for an order that you have benefited from since 1945. And I reiterate what I said before. If this trend goes, we are laying the seeds for a World War III. China, Russia, Turkey, and all these other emerging powers will take cue, and we are going to have a good fight on the international plane.
Yeah, America will effectively now be selling oil to the rest of the world that it does not own, oil that's not in its grounds, but it will reap the economic benefit thereof. And it will ostensibly be selling this oil to the people that are already buying oil from Venezuela, Russia, China, Iran included in that. Well, with the exception of Iran, Brazil included in that. It seems to me as though that this is a point of inflection in the moral question of the international order that Russia, China, Brazil, and all these countries will have to face. And that is, do we support an American imperialist industrial military complex system where they're allowed to sell oil that they ultimately do not own? And if they answer that question in the positive, it means that they embolden and empower the U.S. But if they answer that question in negative, it means that they have to stand up to the U.S. Which way is that scale likely to tip?
Oh, so good to think about what you could do as a backlash against U.S. power. For example, the Tesla and X.com owned by Elon Musk have been subject to boycotts. And that means, well, for our homeboy Elon Musk, he lost a quarter of his net worth in the first few months when he was deep in this administration. Could one do that more generally? Could one have boycotts against Trump and his full set of operations? Many of the countries we've seen are scared, and they've been divided and conquered over the past year. But I think the basic question for oil is whether, if Trump says, okay, there's about 800,000 barrels a day coming from Venezuela. He wants to put billions more through ExxonMobil and Phillips Conoco, Chevron, and the U.S. companies, and sort of increase, because Venezuela has the biggest oil reserves. It's very dirty oil. And then the Saudis are about 6 million barrels a day, the U.S. about 4 million. The Chinese have been buying much of that oil. And whether they would say, no, no, we're not going to be dealing with the stolen property remains to be seen. I suspect that they may find, particularly because Russia still has big surpluses, that they can get their oil elsewhere in the world markets. Iran still has a very strong supply of oil also that goes to China. So it may consolidate, maybe in the way Evans is saying, that there might be some way in which we see a sort of configuration of the West, maybe the BRICS axis. So far, they've actually worked relatively well together, imperial power, sub-imperial connectivity. Yeah. But that may change because of this extraordinary arrogance of Donald Trump. And if he especially goes further, Cuba, Nicaragua, Colombia, maybe Greenland, and he does consolidate a sort of Western hemispheric power, well, they're an invitation, as Evans has said, to China invading Taiwan, Russia continuing to expand its borders.
There's an interesting response from the French government, and I want to read it to you into this. The French government says, the military operation that led to the capture of Nicolas Maduro violates the principle of not resorting to force that underpins international law. France reiterates that no lasting political solution can be imposed from the outside, and that only sovereign people can decide their future. They are perhaps the first Western nation to outrightly condemn the U.S. here. But it's also interesting to note that France has oil interests in Mozambique, potentially South Africa, if what's happening in the Orange Basin goes ahead, to an extent Angola, but very importantly, Guyana, a neighbor of Venezuela. Is this the sort of response you would have expected from the French nation? And would they potentially be a lot more emboldened to support Venezuela?
Well, there's always a temptation, especially if you're European, especially if you're French, to condemn the Yankees. That's easy. In fact, they did so in the Iraq invasion. Not only the French, the Germans as well. They were against Bush and Blair at the time, invading Iraq in 2003, but they didn't do anything. And that's the really crucial question. We've seen Trump demand that the NATO powers, especially Germany and Britain and France, increase their spending to up to 5% of their GDP on military. And the way things are going, unfortunately, these are basically fairly weak governments in Europe, and they're probably going to go along with it. They may, bark a little bit, but Trump will pet them, and they'll do what he wants.
Well, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Prof. Bond, for your time and your analysis and insights. Really do appreciate it. Advocate Ogada, I want to thank you for your time and your insights as well. Really do appreciate it. Of course, this is an ongoing and developing story, and as more information and details come to the fore, we'll continue to bring that to you here on SABC News.